Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Science of Reading program webinar series, Reading Comprehension in Action. My name is Victoria, and I'm on the literacy team here at Amplify. We are so excited you've joined us today to learn more about Amplify Core Knowledge Language Arts, our unique and proven core literacy curriculum for grades K-5. Today's session is being recorded, and we'll share the recording link and presentation deck via email later this week, and you'll receive a certificate of attendance for joining us. If you'd like to access closed captioning, please click on the CC button in the bottom tray and then show captions. Be sure to register for our other webinars at amplify.com/fall 2025 SOR demos. And if you could just click ahead to the next slide, Jen. Perfect. And make sure you register for those even if you can't make all of them. We'll send out the recording links for all the webinars you register for so you can watch them on demand if you need to. And as you can see, we have several that we've already presented during this series. So if you would like to revisit those, make sure to go to that same link, amplify.com fall 2025 SOR demos, to get your registration link and watch those on demand. We welcome comments in the chat. To start, I would love to find out where everyone is joining us from. It is a beautiful, sunny, kind of chilly, but still nice day here in Cleveland, Ohio. Oh, we've got an Australian on. I actually, interestingly, am an Australian citizen. My parents immigrated to the United States when I was 3 years old, so I have dual citizenship, which is pretty cool. All right, looks like we've got people joining from all over the country and the world. Oh my gosh, 83 degrees in Arizona. It's about 45 degrees here in Cleveland, so you've got us beat. All right. Without further ado, I am thrilled to introduce our speaker today, who will be speaking about building reading comprehension and writing skills in Amplify CKLA, Jennifer Lamm. She's an Amplify literacy specialist with 26 years of dedicated experience in the field of education. She's served in various capacities, including classroom and special education teacher, instructional coach, and literacy consultant, each role enhancing her expertise and impact. Her commitment to advancing equitable and impactful literacy instruction is what inspired her to join Amplify, where she continues to support educators and students through research-driven, meaningful learning experiences. Welcome, Jen. We're so thrilled you're here and so excited to hear your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Victoria. I happened to notice there was a fellow Iowan on today. So I am from Iowa, but am coming to you live from our Brooklyn office today. So I am excited to have the opportunity to spend this next hour with you as we look at how reading comprehension and writing skills are incorporated and taught within Amplify CKLA. I just want to start by thanking all of you for taking an hour of your time to join live, or you may be watching the recording later on. Your time is valuable, and we know that the work that you do each day is hard, and yet it's also rewarding. So, by listening in, you are continuing to demonstrate your desire to raise your hand to more opportunities that support your understanding of teaching and learning and continue to expand that toolbox in order to help meet the needs of your students. Now, I want to start by giving you a little bit of time to reflect. So grab some paper or open your notes app, and I want you to take just a minute to jot down some ideas or even just some key words around why reading comprehension and writing are a challenge for teachers and why they can be hard for students. So we're going to take about 30 seconds, 45 seconds here, just jot down some ideas, or if you're with a colleague, turn and talk to them about what you're thinking. always just a little awkward when we do some quiet think time and reflection via the webinar, but it's also good to get us started in thinking about what are some of those barriers, what are some of those challenges, and how does CKLA really help to alleviate some of those challenges? You know, as you were jotting those ideas down, I can imagine that I've had some of those similar thoughts. We think about reading and writing as being really complex. Reading comprehension is abstract, and it's hard to think about what's going on or figuring out what's going on in a student's thinking. And teaching reading comprehension is hard because it's this multifaceted skill that requires more than just reading the words on the page. It requires that background knowledge, that vocabulary. It's teaching our students to use metacognition to have them start thinking about their thinking, but also really pushing them to start analyzing text to determine what's the author's intent. You know, and sometimes our instruction can be hindered. Sometimes that's due to the amount of instructional time we have, maybe the resources that we have to use to support that instruction, and then that idea of and difficulties with transferring skills from one context to another. And then if we think about writing, again, there's that complexity level, like we think about with reading, there's pretty rigorous demands on both teachers and students when we think about teaching writing and actually writing. Again, it's another cognitive task that has lots of demands. We have to think about what are those big ideas? What do we want to share? Who's our audience? But we also have to have all of these little skills that help us create these bigger pieces. We have to understand grammar. We have to understand the syntax. We have to have fine motor skills in order to get things down on paper. And sometimes these challenges are compounded by factors related to our own preparation as teachers and how we either were or were not taught how to write. You know, as we think about the student perspective on reading comprehension and writing, some of their difficulties can be related to a lack of background knowledge, not having something to write about, difficulties with getting the words off the page to then be able to think about, write about that text. Sometimes students lack organizational skills in order to attend to something within the task, both for reading and or writing. And some students struggle to get those words down on page. And if something's hard, oftentimes our motivation to continue doing something really lessens. So let's set the stage for reading comprehension and writing instruction in CKLA classrooms. We're going to start here by centering our conversation around the definition of the science of reading. The defining guide from the Reading League reminds us that the science of reading is truly an ever-evolving body of research that is not new, and that it provides us with this preponderance of evidence to inform how proficient reading and writing develop. Now, I want you to keep that in mind today as we continue. Keep thinking the science of reading is about reading and writing. To kick off this 10th season of Science of Reading, the podcast, host Susan Lambert had an engaging and informative conversation with Dr. Wesley Hoover about the not so simple view of reading model. If you haven't listened in yet, I highly recommend the podcast in general, but this specific podcast is great as well. Now, you are all probably familiar with the simple view of reading with language comprehension, our ability to derive meaning from language, word recognition, that ability to convert written words into speech, leading to skilled reading. Now, over the years, there have been some misunderstandings, some beliefs that science of reading is just about phonics. Well, what has happened as a fallout? There has definitely been an increased awareness, and it's really brought attention to phonics and phonemic awareness. And yet, as teachers and educators, we know that there's more to reading than just phonemic awareness and phonics. So this model represented as a multiplication problem with those two factors and the product of skilled reading really helps to dispel this idea. We know that word recognition and language comprehension are critical to support reading and reading comprehension. It is not an either or, but rather it's a both. Now, Sharon Vaughn shares with us that if you don't know how to read words, there are not enough comprehension strategies to get you to comprehension. So we're going to take just a few minutes to really illustrate this point. So if I would ask you to read this passage and find the main idea, my guess is that you may give up probably 2 words in. It's really quite difficult to find the main idea when decoding the words seems impossible and we're not able to accurately or efficiently do that. So likewise, if I ask you to take just a minute to read this passage and then find the main idea, I'm guessing that all of you now feel better about decoding the words because you're able to read these words. But if I gave you a little more time and asked you to read this, put the main idea in the chat, no matter how strong your decoding skills are or how great you are at main idea, if you don't have background knowledge on cricket, it's pretty much impossible in order to get much meaning from this text. And again, this comes from Natalie Wexler's The Knowledge Gap. So if you haven't had a chance to read that, I strongly suggest reading that as well. Now, going back to the simple view of reading, both word recognition and language comprehension are essential to developing a skilled reader. Now, to expand on that, we can't ignore what we talked about earlier, that definition of the science of reading. Remember that preponderance of evidence to inform how reading and writing develop? Well, as Tim Shanahan says, if you want better reading scores, the science of reading says we cannot neglect writing. Which brings us to the simple view of writing. Also, a multiplication problem with composition and transcription skills leading to skilled writing. Now, I want you to notice a couple of things. Notice that word recognition and transcription skills, they're right beside each other or more stacked one on top of the other. Well, that's because they are reciprocal. Word recognition is the ability to accurately, effortlessly, and efficiently lift words up off the page. Transcription skills. The reciprocal process is being able to accurately, effortlessly, and efficiently put words down on the page. So think handwriting and spelling. Like word recognition and language comprehension, the simple view of writing acknowledges the reciprocal nature of language comprehension and composition. We need to understand language in order to use language. So why did I take the time to walk through the definition of the science of reading and look at the simple view of reading and writing? Well, we know and recognize that there are many processes that are at play to develop reading comprehension and writing skills. Today, we are going to zoom in on one side of this work, but I want to make very clear that word recognition and transcription skills are vital to reading comprehension and writing. But since we only have an hour, we are going to focus our time today on the ideas of language comprehension and composition as a way to support and teach reading comprehension and writing skills. So what has this looked like in the past? Well, for many of us as educators, we've experienced this silo situation where each part of our ELA block or instruction has been taught in isolation. As a 3rd grade classroom teacher, I had a reading block, a spelling lesson, I had a grammar lesson. We also taught comprehension strategies on a schedule. Introduce main idea on Monday and assess on Friday. On top of that, I had a separate writing block. Now, this writing block, I loosely call it a writing block because it included some writing activities. And then we focused in on 3 to 4 big writing pieces throughout the year. I'm not sure how much actual writing instruction I did. And again, all of this writing was done in isolation. So CKLA takes an integrated approach rather than that isolated approach to teaching reading and writing and all things ELA. So what we have learned is that it's more effective and more efficient to teach reading and writing in tandem, as we know they are reciprocal processes. Readers and writers do very similar things, so that's why it makes sense to teach them in tandem. In our exploration of reading comprehension and writing skills in CKLA, we are going to utilize the reading rope. Now, Dr. Hollis Scarborough created this model as a way to illustrate the various components necessary to develop skilled reading. It's like zooming in on the simple view of reading. The rope aligns with the simple view of reading and that students need language comprehension and word recognition. Now, if we further inspect the strands of the rope, I want to point out that nowhere on these strands do we see reading comprehension strategies. CKLA's approach to teaching comprehension is not through explicit teaching of strategies, such as making inferences, but rather it's through this interactive text experience that guides students in making meaning. When you look through CKLA, you won't find a lesson that's strictly titled Making Inferences or Main Idea like you might previously in a different program. But those strategies are scaffolded and embedded throughout the year. They're embedded into the before, during, and after reading activities as well. Building knowledge to build strong comprehension is the core premise of Amplify CKLA. Natalie Wexler, that I mentioned earlier from that main idea activity from the knowledge gap, she further explores this point in this 2.5-minute video called Prior Knowledge Wins the Game. We can link this video in the resources so that you can watch the video in its entirety. As educators, we think of reading, when we think of reading comprehension, really our first thoughts go to those strategies like teaching main idea and inferencing, because that's how we were trained, might have even been what we experienced as students. Natalie Wexler explains that teaching strategies like main idea and inferencing, it's not wrong. But what has happened is that we've taken all this time away from content areas like science, social studies, to really put the focus on reading skills and strategies. What this has done is really put this overemphasis on strategies. And what we know about how comprehension works is really it's about the amount of knowledge that you have. So Natalie says it's what we put in the foreground that matters to comprehension. And in this case, it's knowledge. So the question is, what does this really look like in practice? So as we look at this, Sharon Vaughn reiterates Wexler's message by saying, we have to have efficient word reading. We have to know what words mean. And we have to have background knowledge in order for things like main idea, summarization, and inferencing to become meaningful tasks that help us dig deeper into what we're working on, listening to, or reading. So let's look at the very first unit in CKLA for kindergarten to see how putting text in the foreground allows students to learn and practice comprehension skills and strategies. So this is the very first unit in the instructional sequence for kindergarten. This is Starlight, Star Bright, Nursery Rhymes, and Fables. So students are listening to 2 nursery rhymes, and we ask them to orally compare and contrast the main characters in these 2 nursery rhymes. Then students are going to retell a fable by sequencing beginning, middle, and end of the fable using images. Students are also shown an image from an upcoming nursery rhyme, and they're asked to make a prediction about what they think is going to happen. And throughout all of CKLA, students are making inferences as they answer questions. In this case, they're answering a question about a pig's feeling after listening to a story. Students need to be given plenty of opportunities to practice these strategies and continue that practice with increasingly challenging texts. In order for these tasks to be meaningful, we know that we have to make sure that students have that necessary background knowledge and vocabulary to engage with the text that they are listening to or reading. So we've established that the text will be in the foreground for the learning within CKLA. So let's start to zero in on key components to develop reading comprehension and writing. So here we are back at the rope. Now, just to make sure that we are all on the same page about the program design of CKLA, we know that by teaching these two strands separately yet in tandem gives our youngest learners the cognitive capacity to focus on and master each skill. So CKLA follows this two-strand approach by teaching word recognition in the skill strand and language comprehension through the knowledge strand. The strands start to weave their way together as students start to become increasingly automatic with word recognition and increasingly strategic with language comprehension. And that's exactly what CKLA's program design does, as well as we move into that integrated strand in grades 3 through 5. Now, as a reminder, we are really going to explore how CKLA supports the development of language comprehension through the upper strands of the rope. Now, knowing that our third, fourth, and fifth grade students are working through that integrated approach to the standards, as educators, we can use this model to help us see the importance of each strand as it is building to skilled reading. It can also help us identify areas where students may need additional support. So starting at the top of the rope, let's explore the importance of building knowledge and vocabulary and what that looks like in CKLA as a means to support reading comprehension and writing. So CKLA has a powerful knowledge sequence where students engage with a wide variety of people, perspectives, and high quality texts. Students grow from week to week and year to year. Students are growing both within and across grade levels to develop background knowledge and vocabulary that supports reading comprehension and writing composition. Marilyn Adams refers to this as that mental Velcro. So students encounter topics through an intentional sequence that gives new learning something to stick to. Now, connections in CKLA are made across science as students learn about plants, animals and habitats, how to classify animals as vertebrates and invertebrates, and exploring the world of plants and animals below the surface of the water. Students make these connections across social studies while they explore the world through geography in kindergarten and first grade. Then they start to explore the bigger world again as they move into the history of ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and Europe's Middle Ages. To round out these connections, students explore literature and the arts. Each grade level instructional sequence begins with a literature-based unit. These connections are really connecting to students to what they know and understand through nursery rhymes, fables, fairy tales, classic stories, and personal narratives. So in CKLA, we just said that we need to expose students to developing background knowledge. That's really going to help support reading comprehension and writing. And so we're going to expose them to all of this diverse and rich text. How are we going to help them access this text? So let's first work to answer this question. I want you to use the chat and answer this question of at what age does reading comprehension catch up to listening comprehension? Is it age 6, age 10, age 13, 20, or never? Drop that in the chat. Looks like we have some numbers going in there. We have a variety of answers, and you're probably just wondering, come on, Jen, just tell us what that answer is. So as we look at this graph, research shows that listening comprehension far outpaces reading comprehension until the age of 13. Age 13, that's around 8th grade, 7th, 8th grade. So CKLA utilizes this research as we think about supporting students in accessing background knowledge, vocabulary. So we use content-rich read-alouds in grades K through 2 to expose students to more complex texts, to expand that background knowledge and vocabulary beyond what they can yet independently decode. So these content-rich read-alouds are written 2 grade levels above. Now, that support continues into 3rd grade with an additional read aloud portion called speaking and listening that really helps support and bridge how students access that rich and diverse content in K2, and before we move students into that more active and independent reading. This quote by Marilyn Adams really helps solidify and understand the importance of read alouds. She says that reading aloud with children is known to be the single most important activity for building the knowledge and skills they will eventually require for learning to read. I want to highlight a key word here. Small line there, hopefully you can see that. That key word here is with. In CKLA, these content-rich read-alouds, and anytime we read aloud, it is with students. We're not just reading to students, but rather we're engaging students with the text. So we're going to dive in and see how knowledge and vocabulary build utilizing this idea of reading with students in CKLA. Now, in our time together, we are going to focus on 3 lessons, one from kindergarten, one from grade 3, and one from grade 5. We're going to start in kindergarten, knowledge domain 4, see how they grow plants. Now, these content-rich read-alouds in our K2 knowledge domains consist of 3 distinct parts. The first is introduce the read-aloud, conduct the read-aloud, and then the application. So introducing the read-aloud is a way to review materials from previous read-alouds or domains and helps to really make connections for students. So here, students are shown an image from the previous read-aloud, and students are asked to name the 2 kinds of trees and describe how they're different. So notice that students are being asked to compare and contrast within the context of the content they're learning. So we're putting that text in the foreground versus putting those skills and strategies in the foreground. Each read aloud begins with the teacher providing students with a purpose for listening. Students learn that the main topic or main idea is evergreen trees and that they are to listen carefully to learn about how they are different from deciduous trees. During the read aloud, students view images while the teacher is reading aloud from the teacher guide. This allows students to focus on the content of the read aloud to build background knowledge and vocabulary rather than putting their cognitive energy into decoding words. Remember, these content-rich read alouds are written 2 grade levels above. So within the teacher guide, you'll also notice this highlighted text. This is what makes the read aloud an interactive read aloud. These are those moments to stop and engage students in brief conversations about the content and or that vocabulary. So it's about that read aloud engaging with students alongside that text. Vocabulary is a key component of a knowledge building curriculum. Words are important and students need to know what that means, what they mean. Better reading comprehension is directly linked to vocabulary. In CKLA, vocabulary is learned both implicitly and taught explicitly. The unit introduction of every teacher guide is a tool that every teacher should read as it provides information on why the unit is important, what students have previously learned that's going to help support the learning in this unit, as well as core vocabulary. This chart that's in every unit introduction contains the words that will appear in introducing the read aloud or within the read aloud, and that's part of that implicit learning. The bold-faced words in the list have an associated word work activity, which is then that explicit teaching of vocabulary. We know students are not immediately expected to be able to use all of these words on their own, but through repeated exposure throughout the lessons, students really acquire a good understanding of most of these words and begin to use some in conversation and in writing. And in most CKLA schools, that's the first thing that teachers and parents talk about is how much students are using the vocabulary words. This word work Routine is the vocabulary work. So today's word is evergreen. This 6-step routine begins in kindergarten and continues through grade 5. So students are directed back to where they first heard the word evergreen in the read aloud. So they're hearing it in context. They repeat the word and then they're given a student-friendly definition. Students hear it in another context and then engage in some deliberate practice to develop greater understanding and usage. In this follow-up activity, the teacher reads a sentence about a tree, and students have to decide if the sentence describes a deciduous tree or an evergreen tree. Now, notice that students are going to be asked to respond in complete sentences. Why is this critical? Well, because of the connection between oral language and written language. So we want to train our students to speak in complete sentences because we want them to write in complete sentences. And it's amazing how many times these kindergartners can say deciduous. They get really, really good at it. Now, as we move from kindergarten plants, we're going to now look at how knowledge building and vocabulary transforms in fur, fins, and feathers, animal classification in grade 3. So vocabulary continues to be identified through the core vocabulary chart in the unit introduction, as well as at each lesson level. Third grade, again, utilizes this additional speaking and listening component that follows the same format as the K2 read aloud. So here the teacher introduces the read aloud and students are asked to listen to identify the main idea. The read aloud is presented in an interactive format and then discussed when students answer those literal, inferential, and evaluative questions. The read aloud wraps up with that 6-step word work routine or that vocabulary. Again, teachers provide a purpose for listening. They're determining that main idea. Again, similar to the format of the K2 read aloud, the students are listening and viewing images to support the building of background knowledge and vocabulary, which is really going to help support students and prepare them for this next lesson segment, which really moves our students into that more active and independent reading. Here, high-quality texts engage students in reading and writing activities with the text at the center. Each of these texts is set up as a chapter book and are truly the heart of teaching the ELA standards. Now, as students move into this reading, students are now working to identify supporting details. Before, they were listening for main idea. Now we're working on identifying supporting details. The teacher starts by reading aloud and asking students to use the image to point out differences among the different groups of animals. So what are students doing again? They're comparing and contrasting, similar to what we asked our kindergarten students to do with deciduous and evergreen trees. And all of that work is embedded within the context of the content that they're learning and reading. The teacher explains to students that the main idea of a paragraph is mammals. Students are to read to find out characteristics of mammals. The teacher reviews that the supporting details are all of the characteristics of mammals, like having hair, giving birth to live babies, and that mammal mothers make milk to feed their newborns. Then students read page 29. After reading, now students are asked, what is the main idea of the passage and what are the supporting details? Students then move this learning from an oral exercise into writing by reading this last page and writing the main idea and supporting details on a half sheet of paper. Not only are students building background knowledge, they're also hearing and reading that vocabulary in context, all of which is supporting reading comprehension and also working to build writing skills. So this work has been scaffolded for them, starting with that read aloud and the teacher modeling, and then moving into text where students are reading and applying their learning. That deeper dive into vocabulary occurs during word work and then expands in grades 3 through 5 through the vocab app. This allows students to practice tier 2 vocabulary words through fun, interactive games in a variety of settings. This provides students with just some additional encounters with the words through engaging narratives. Now, our final stop, as we're just talking about background knowledge and vocabulary, is in 5th grade with the Deep Blue World Oceans. So the complexity of the text has expanded, and here students are using the text to find and record key information about coral reefs and kelp forest ecosystems, including main idea and details about the coral reefs and kelp forest ecosystems. The teacher reads aloud the first section of the text while completing a think aloud to really model taking those notes around main idea and supporting details. Students continue in partnerships to read the remaining chapter while gathering notes. Again, all around main idea and supporting details with that text in the foreground. Now, while reading, students read about clusters and then work through this consistent word work routine. I want to take this and add on another layer of complexity with vocabulary, which is morphology. Morphology provides a framework for understanding word meaning by analyzing meaningful parts called morphemes. So by learning how prefixes, suffixes, and root words function, students can expand their vocabulary. They can comprehend new words and see relationships between different words. So students learn that micro means extremely small. They engage in some group review and practices, and then they apply that within the context of the content that they've been learning, which is ocean and ocean water. Students encounter words like microscopic and microplastics as they are embedded into the text students are reading. This morphology work supports comprehension of what they're reading. Now, I want to go back to this quote by Marilyn Adams. We really focused on the word with. You even saw in 5th grade, teachers are doing a read aloud as part of that work. But now I want to focus on another part of this quote, in that she says reading aloud helps build the knowledge and skills students will eventually require for learning to read. Well, what does that mean? Well, I go back to the baseball study done by Recht and Leslie in 1998 that helped us understand just how important background knowledge is to comprehension. So students were assessed on their ability and knowledge of baseball, and each student was asked to silently read a narrative text about half an inning of baseball and then recreate that using wooden pieces and describing what happened. Key findings from that: not surprising, those students who had high reading ability, high knowledge of baseball scored the highest. Those students with low reading ability, low knowledge of baseball struggled the most. But what was surprising is that those students with low reading ability and a high knowledge of baseball actually outperformed students with a higher reading ability but a low knowledge of baseball. As Recht explains, prior knowledge creates a scaffolding for information that allows weaker readers to compensate for their reading difficulties when they have that relevant background knowledge. Now, we've looked at the importance of background knowledge and vocabulary and how CKLA works to build capacities in both. We're just going to scoot down the rope just a little bit to explore the role of sentences and reasoning as a means of working toward reading comprehension and writing. I want to start with a quick question here. I want you to finish this in the chat. Students are coming to school today with blank oral language skills. You have two choices: A, stronger, or B, weaker. So students are coming to school today with, I probably don't even need to wait any longer. I'm seeing a very consistent answer of weaker oral language skills. What do you suppose is at play here? Could be technology, right? That could be playing a factor in oral language skills. We know that we are born with some innate abilities while others require explicit instruction and deliberate practice. Oral language is an innate ability. Our brains are wired to speak. It happens naturally at birth when we wait to hear babies cry. So what we need to do is leverage our natural ability for speaking to support reading and writing. So what this might look like is having students develop sentences orally before we ask them to put paper to pencil. It also looks like responding to questions before, during, and after that reading as we're listening to or reading that on our own. So we're going to start with sentences here. There's a couple of things to keep in mind. We know that sentences really have immense importance in facilitating effective communication. We want students to be able to speak effectively, but we also know that sentences convey meaning orally, but it also means that When we read, we have to understand sentences. So what does that mean in CKLA? Well, we're going to start with the sentence and expand. So high quality writing depends on one's ability to compose varied and well-structured sentences. And in turn, if students can compose those complex sentences, they have a greater likelihood of being able to comprehend complex sentences that they encounter in their reading. So sentence level work is done within the context of the content that is being taught. So Timothy Shanahan shared that if all students did equally well on decoding, vocabulary, and memory tests, we would still see variations in reading comprehension ability because of syntax difference. The kids who understand syntax comprehend better than the ones who don't. So we've highlighted oral language is important. Sentences are important, but so is reasoning. So what is reasoning? Reasoning allows readers to go beyond that literal text to infer meaning and think critically. Sharon Vaughn says that asking questions that get students to think about and wonder about their reading and then integrate it with what they know, she says that's where that real learning juice is. She and Susan Lambert were having a conversation on Science of Reading, the podcast, and Susan really summarized that in a beautiful way, saying that we always have to think about reading comprehension in the context of the text that's in front of students. And in order to help them understand that or comprehend what they're looking at or reading or listening to, we really need to think about the kind of questions that we're asking students. So we want to engage them in text that gives them enough meat to really think about and reason with that text. So that text truly matters in what we're using in order to work on reading comprehension, as well as preparing students for writing. So in a nutshell, that text matters. CKLA uses high quality text as that vehicle for learning, developing oral language, reading and writing sentences. So if we go back to kindergarten plants domain, to wrap up the read aloud and to further support student learning, students are asked a variety of literal, inferential, and evaluative questions. Students get into think pair share partnerships to discuss how deciduous trees and evergreen trees are alike and how they're different. Again, working on compare and contrast. Within these questions after the read aloud, you're also going to notice foundational sentence writing is taught, modeled, and practiced. The teacher reviews with students that there's two parts to every sentence. The first part tells who or what. And we remind students that the second part usually tells what's happening, but sometimes it describes a state of being or how someone or something is. The teacher uses this image to model that this image is showing an evergreen tree. So we'll start our sentence with the evergreen tree is that first part and tells what is in the image. Now, thinking about that second part, as we think about, is there something happening? Well, in the read aloud, it didn't describe what is happening to the evergreen tree because it didn't tell them anything about what evergreen trees were doing. Instead, the read aloud explained that the evergreen tree is green all year. So the second part of the sentence is describing a state of being or how the evergreen tree is. So now as the teacher, I'm writing this second part, is green all year, and then reread this and continue to talk to students about capitals and end punctuation and that there are two parts to every sentence. This work continues into animal classification, where students are engaged in a turn and talk to share the meaning of the phrase constant temperature. Work on sentence expansion by using a because but so to complete the sentence also happens while discussing the reading. So humans and fish are vertebrates. Learning how to write complex sentences with the conjunctions because but so helps writing become more clear and more complex. And if students can compose those sentences with conjunctions accurately, they can better understand them when they encounter them in reading. So the reading, discussion, and writing work all work to help to support students when they're applying their learning on their student activity book pages as well. Now, this Read with Partners continues as we're looking at oceans. Students discuss the literal inferential questions. We direct students to read the text multiple times and recording notes as they read. Sentence level work within CKLA starts orally because it happens naturally, And then throughout CKLA, they learn the 4 sentence types, work to combine and expand sentences, all centered around the text that they're listening to or reading. Now we're moving here on the rope to this last strand with the mental model, and we're only going to be here for a quick minute or two. If you joined our Comprehension Connections webinar week, you probably saw Susan Lambert share this example of what is required as a reader when creating a mental model. So researchers use the term mental model to describe the structure you create in your memory while reading a passage. We can think of a mental model as a network of idea units. So Susan in the webinar asked us to read this short paragraph and then answer, why did Carla get wet on the way to school? Well, as a fluent reader, you know that it was due to rain, but this sentence doesn't explicitly say that. So how do you know, and how do we help our students make those inferences? Well, young readers have to decode the words on the page, but to read fluently, they also have to learn how to comprehend those words. There are students who can excel at decoding, but then they struggle with language comprehension, and it could be due to mental modeling, this key component of the language comprehension process. So many factors beyond decoding impact the development of an accurate mental model, including vocabulary, pronoun tracking, syntactic awareness of how words are working together in a sentence, and some of those gap-filling inferences. Susan is going to be back with more information on the mental model, so be sure to watch for upcoming webinars to learn more. Now, I want to think about all the areas we've looked at: knowledge and vocabulary, sentences and reading, and then our really quick stop at the mental model. As we come back to the reciprocal nature of reading and writing, students have been listening to complex text, reading complex text, discussing through various speaking and listening activities, and working at the sentence level to not only understand content, but to share understanding of that content, all supporting language comprehension. Now, we need to use what we learned there and now expand to composition, which is part of the process in CKLA. So students have worked to develop automaticity with transcription skills. Remember, that really hasn't been a part of our journey today, but I am reiterating how important those transcription skills are. Why? I'm guessing some of you have had some students in your classroom who have chosen other words to use in their composition because they didn't know how to spell a word. Yep, handwriting and spelling need to be automatic so students can focus on the what of their writing rather than the how. This is again thinking about cognitive load for students. So as we move into the idea of longer writing pieces in CKLA, we know that those pieces are taught and developed through the content that students are listening to or reading. There is not a separate writing block, but rather integrated writing centered around the text. So writing composition in kindergarten starts with oral communication and drawing. Students learn about informative writing. They label the plant parts and the life cycle of plants. We talked earlier about the importance of reading the unit introduction, which is included in that is this information on writing that students are going to be doing throughout the unit. Suggestions will also be given as to which activities you might want to add to a student writing portfolio to really look at the progress of student writing. As students grow and learn as readers and writers, their writing expands as they have gained lots of skills and knowledge. In 3rd grade, students complete quick writes and a longer, more formal writing piece. As animal researchers, students utilize graphic organizers to gather information about various vertebrates. Students complete an informational writing piece for this unit that focuses on organizing and communicating characteristics and classification of one specific vertebrate. Throughout the unit, students were listening for and identifying main idea and characteristics of mammals within the text, all of which have really prepared them to write this informative piece with a topic sentence and supporting details. Students utilize revision checklists with peer feedback and editing checklists to round out the writing process. Student writing in 5th grade expands as students read about marine animals and their habitats. They plan and write a 5-paragraph essay about a marine animal and its relationship within the food web and its role, or in the ecosystem and its role in the food web. This learning progression for informative writing began in the read aloud as students listened for and identified the main idea or topic, as well as characteristics and supporting details. Students use that learning and practice to now transfer that to informative writing that includes main idea and topic sentences alongside supporting details. Students in CKLA classrooms write across all genre types multiple times a year, including poetry that starts in second grade. Rubrics help teachers evaluate that writing across genre types at each grade level. The CKLA Writing Approach and Progressions brochure is a great way to see how writing builds through both transcription and composition skills. So we'll be sure to include that in the resources as well. Now, we started our time together reflecting on why reading comprehension is challenging for teachers and students, and why writing instruction and outcomes might not be where we want them to be yet. So, just thinking back over our journey and where we've been, we really focused in on background knowledge and vocabulary, sentences, and reasoning, and then moved into that mental model, and then also looked at how what they were working on in reading was supporting that work that was happening in composition as well. You probably noticed that there were some through storylines with main idea and details, compare and contrast. Comprehension is taught differently in CKLA as far as putting text at the foreground rather than putting those comprehension skills and strategies in the foreground. CKLA teaches reading and writing in tandem to develop engaged, active readers and writers, deep thinkers, and really powerful communicators. With Amplify CKLA, we help teachers teach students how to read and also give them the skills, the reasons, and motivation to read and write through rich and diverse text across science, social studies, literature, and the arts. So I think as we're coming here toward the end of our hour together, we have just a couple of minutes that we could probably answer a few questions. So if there are any questions, Victoria, have you seen any coming through that you'd like to share with me?
I actually haven't seen many questions today, so I'll just give people a couple of minutes if they want to drop some in the chat or Q&A, and um, otherwise, we can give people their time back. But this was
Time
fantastic. Thank you so much, Jen.
is always a beautiful thing in busy teacher schedules.
Yes, absolutely. Everyone's saying it was a great session. Very informative, very in-depth, comprehensive look at our core literacy program. Oh, we looks like we have a question. Do you focus on punctuation?
Yeah, so actually it starts in the skill strand. So if we think back to the rope, the two-strand approach, as we are engaging students in looking at that decodable text, we're also cueing students into how sentences begin with a capital, end with end punctuation. And then as we were looking at plants today, it is right in the teacher guide to point out the type of end punctuation used. Students are also taught the four sentence types. And if we're teaching the four sentence types, we're also going to need to talk about end punctuation for the variety of sentences.
Perfect. One other question. How do you suggest ELA teachers collaborate with subject matter teachers?
Yeah, so
Really
thinking
interesting
about
question.
cross-curricular connections, that's the beautiful part of a knowledge building curriculum is that students are really, even if they're learning about oceans in fifth grade and then going into sixth grade, there's something in science or social studies that's going to be making a connection. It's really laying that foundation of the mental Velcro and it's building that stickiness as thinking about what might be happening in other content areas. Those would be great conversations to have through any type of PLC time to find out, well, when do you teach this in science and social studies? Will I be giving your students some prior knowledge that will help support that learning that's happening?
Great. I think that was the only other question that I saw. So That said, do you want to go on and share a couple more resources?
Sure. So as we think about some resources, and I mentioned the Comprehension Connections webinar week. It was a series of 5 webinars all around comprehension, curriculum agnostic, so not tied to CKLA, so to speak. And then the Comprehension 101 resource bundle is a great place to get on and learn just a little bit more. There's information about the mental model as well. And then I would be remiss if I did not share our award-winning podcast. I travel a lot, so having podcasts queued up is a great way for me to continue my learning. Ana Torres, in Beyond My Years, she is connecting with a plethora of seasoned educators to address common classroom challenges. She has such a way of connecting with teachers and honoring the work that they are doing. This season has 4 episodes so far, so be sure and tune in. And then I mentioned Dr. Susan Lambert, host of Science of Reading, the podcast. Season 10 is kicked off, and here Susan is really working with researchers and breaking down the latest research on reading comprehension and examining each component of this complex process. So be sure to tune in to both of those podcasts. You will learn something from each episode.
Perfect. Actually, we had one additional question that I just saw came in for the Q&A. As we've been talking about comprehension and knowledge, I'm wondering if there's a strategic approach for multilingual learners, or is it more of the same? And actually, we get this question quite a bit, so it would be great if you could answer that, Jen.
So supporting multilingual English learners. As we know, visuals are a great way to help support our students who are trying to really jump into this knowledge-rich curriculum. So that K2 read aloud, having those visual images really helps support that as well. And vocabulary, having an opportunity to engage them in that vocabulary will help with comprehension as well. To note, as we take that back into CKLA, the beginning of each lesson has what's called universal access. That is a great place to go. That can be used to support MLEL students. Also within CKLA are the MLEL supports based on 3 levels of language acquisition that are embedded within the lesson. So there are some call outs at various points within the lesson that can help support the MLEL students as they are engaging in that work as well.
All right, wonderful. Thanks so much, Jen, and thank you all so much for joining today. It was a really, really informative session. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you, everyone.